The Romans conquered half the known world, built roads that lasted 2,000 years, and gave us the calendar we still use today. But when it came to washing their clothes, they soaked their finest togas in human pee and stomped on them with bare feet. They did this for over 500 years and somehow convinced themselves it was totally normal. I mean, we complain about doing laundry now, but at least we don't have to collect our neighbor's urine first. Imagine this. You're walking through ancient Rome, and instead of Starbucks on every corner, there are clay pots filled with human pee. The Romans turned bathroom breaks into a legitimate business model, and honestly, it was kind of brilliant in the most disgusting way possible. Every Roman citizen became an unwitting employee in the laundry industry just by taking a leak. Professional pee collectors made daily rounds through neighborhoods like the world's worst ice cream truck, buying fermented urine from households and businesses. And before you ask, who would sell their pee? Logically, everyone, because the money was good enough to make people forget how weird this was. The Romans weren't just randomly collecting any old pee. They had quality standards. Fresh urine was considered weak sauce, literally. But pee that had been sitting around fermenting for weeks, that was liquid gold. The fermentation process breaks down urea into ammonia, creating a cleaning agent so powerful it could strip stains better than most modern detergents. Can you imagine having urine quality inspector on your resume? Because that was a real job, these professionals could tell you the exact age and strength of any batch just by looking at it and taking a whiff. They developed rating systems like wine sommeliers, except instead of notes of cherry and oak, they were discussing the bouquet of 3-week-old human waste. The storage situation was absolutely massive. Entire warehouses filled with thousands of clay pots, each containing pee in different stages of decomposition. Workers had to rotate stock, mix batches for optimal strength, and maintain perfect storage conditions. Imagine being the guy who had to explain to his wife that he spent all day managing a pee warehouse. The Roman government actually taxed this stuff. Emperor Vespasian imposed the famous pee tax, and when people complained about how gross it was, he supposedly held up a gold coin and said, "Money doesn't stink." That phrase is still used today when talking about making money from questionable sources. Even 2,000 years ago, politicians had to defend weird tax policies. The logistics alone blow my mind. How do you transport thousands of gallons of fermenting urine through city streets without causing a public health disaster? The Romans figured it out because, apparently, clean togas were worth any amount of organizational nightmare. Now, you might be wondering where all this magical pee actually got used. Welcome to the fullonica, which was basically a Roman dry cleaner crossed with a chemical weapons facility. If you thought your local laundromat smelled bad, you clearly never experienced the ammonia fog of a Roman laundry. Fullonicas were sophisticated businesses that processed hundreds of garments daily using techniques that would probably violate every OSHA or Occupational Safety and Health Administration regulation ever written. The main workspace had rows of stone tubs, each filled with different concentrations of fermented urine, depending on what needed cleaning. The liquid in these tubs looked nothing like regular pee. Weeks of fermentation turned it into a brownish, bubbling soup that frothed like a witch's cauldron and released ammonia fumes strong enough to make your eyes water from across the room. Workers called fullones spent their entire careers breathing this stuff, which explains why they probably had the life expectancy of a mayfly. These fullones were actually skilled professionals. They understood complex chemistry before chemistry was even a word. They knew exactly how long silk could stay in ammonia before dissolving, which concentration worked best for wool, and how to remove wine stains without destroying expensive fabric. Basically, they were chemical engineers who happened to work with human waste. The working conditions were so bad that Roman writers described fullonicas as places where the stench could knock a vulture from the sky. And yet, people lined up to get their clothes cleaned there because the results were incredible. Roman togas came out whiter than anything we can achieve today without industrial bleach. Think about that for a second. We have modern washing machines, synthetic detergents, and industrial chemicals, but somehow Romans using fermented pee got better results. That's either really impressive or really embarrassing for modern laundry technology. But if you think soaking clothes in aged urine was the worst part of Roman laundry, wait until you hear about what happened next. After soaking clothes in fermented pee, fullones had to get in the tubs and literally dance on the laundry with their bare feet for hours. I'm not making this up. The Romans invented human washing machines, and somehow this was considered a legitimate career path. This wasn't just random stomping around like you're crushing grapes. The Romans developed specific dancing techniques for different fabrics, gentle rolling motions for delicate silk, firm rhythmic pounding for heavy wool, and precise targeted pressure for stubborn stains. Imagine having to learn choreography just to do laundry. The physical requirements were insane. Workers had to maintain perfect rhythm and pressure for hours while standing in caustic chemicals that were literally burning their feet. The ammonia concentration was so high it ate through skin, creating open wounds that never healed because of constant chemical exposure. Roman medical texts actually have a term for this: fuller's foot. When your job is so bad that doctors create a special name for the horrific injuries it causes, maybe it's time to consider a career change. But apparently, the money was good enough that people kept signing up to have their feet destroyed by ammonia. The stompers worked in teams, rotating in and out of the tubs to prevent anyone from being exposed too long. But even with breaks, veteran stompers could be identified by their scarred, discolored feet and the distinctive limp that came from years of chemical burns. These people were literally sacrificing their ability to walk normally just to clean other people's clothes. And the worst part? The technique actually worked. Modern analysis of Roman fabrics shows cleaning results that rival contemporary methods. So we can't even say they were suffering for nothing. Their human washing machine system was genuinely effective. But wait, you thought standing in pee and stomping on clothes was bad? The Romans were just getting started. After hours of ammonia treatment, Roman clothes had to be rinsed, which sounds simple until you realize the Romans made even washing with water unnecessarily complicated and disgusting. They couldn't just use regular water. Oh no, they had to add more weird chemicals to make the process as unpleasant as possible. The main rinsing agent was something called fuller's earth, which is basically clay that absorbs oils and residues. Sounds harmless, right? Wrong. When mixed with water, fuller's earth created a thick gray sludge that looked like wet concrete and smelled like a swamp. Workers had to submerge the ammonia-soaked clothes in this mixture and knead them like bread dough. Can you imagine explaining this job to someone today? Well, first I soak clothes in aged human urine, then I stomp on them with my bare feet, then I rinse them in clay soup. I'm pretty sure even the most desperate job seeker would pass on that opportunity. The rinsing required multiple stages with different clay concentrations and temperatures. Clothes moved through a series of increasingly less disgusting clay baths, with workers manually hauling dripping wet fabrics from one gross mixture to another. The floors were constantly covered in clay slurry, creating conditions so slippery that workplace accidents were probably a daily occurrence. Another popular rinsing method used fermented wine or vinegar to neutralize the ammonia, because apparently the Romans looked at their already toxic work environment and thought, you know what this needs? More chemical reactions. The combination of alcohol vapors, acid, and leftover ammonia created fumes so nasty that workers frequently passed out from respiratory distress. The physical demands were brutal too. Waterlogged fabrics weighed a ton, and workers had to lift, twist, and wring out these heavy materials while standing in caustic solutions. Imagine doing CrossFit while being slowly poisoned by chemical fumes. That was basically a full one's daily workout routine. What amazes me is that Romans accepted all this as totally normal. They could have developed safer alternatives, but the urine-based system worked so well that they figured the human cost was just part of doing business. Ancient Rome, where worker safety was apparently just a suggestion, but believe it or not, the worst was yet to come. Just when you think Roman laundry couldn't get any worse, they decided to finish the process by fumigating clothes with burning sulfur, because obviously what this chemical nightmare needed was some toxic gas to really complete the experience. The fumigation happened in small enclosed chambers where clothes hung while sulfur burned in braziers below. The sulfur dioxide gas was so concentrated it could literally kill anyone who stayed in the room too long. Workers had to dash in and out like they were defusing a bomb, holding their breath and making quick adjustments before the fumes knocked them unconscious. Roman medical texts describe something called Fuller's lung, which was basically what happened when you spent years breathing sulfur dioxide. Chronic coughing, shortness of breath, and progressive lung failure. Imagine having to list poison gas exposure under job hazards on your employment contract. But here's the thing. The sulfur fumigation wasn't just random torture. It actually served multiple purposes. The gas whitened fabrics to that brilliant Roman white, killed insects, prevented mold, and gave clothes a fresh smell that covered up any lingering chemical odors. It was like a combination bleach, pesticide, and air freshener all rolled into one deadly package. The timing had to be perfect. Too little sulfur and the clothes wouldn't be white enough. Too much and the fabric would fall apart. Workers had to monitor the process through tiny windows, judging the right moment to stop based on color changes and gas density. One mistake could ruin an expensive toga and potentially get you beaten by an angry customer. Think about the skill level required here. These weren't uneducated people randomly burning sulfur. They were chemical technicians who understood precise timing, temperature control, and gas concentration management. They just happened to be doing it in conditions that would shut down any modern workplace in about 5 minutes. The fact that Romans tolerated this for centuries shows how much they valued clean, white clothing. They were literally willing to kill people to maintain their fashion standards, and somehow this seemed reasonable to them. But who exactly were these people crazy enough to work in chemical warfare conditions just to clean clothes? Roman society had a serious love-hate relationship with laundry workers. They desperately needed clean clothes to maintain their social status, but they absolutely despised the people who made it possible. Fullones occupied the absolute bottom of Roman society, ranking somewhere below gravediggers and just above people who cleaned sewers for a living. Wealthy Romans would pay premium prices for perfectly clean togas, then refuse to be seen in public with the people who cleaned them. Fullones were banned from certain public spaces, excluded from social events, and generally treated like walking contamination. It was the ultimate don't ask, don't tell policy about how their clothes got clean. The irony is incredible when you think about it. These were skilled professionals who understood complex chemistry, managed sophisticated operations, and provided services that rich Romans literally couldn't live without. But because their job involved human waste, they were considered permanently unclean and socially unacceptable. Some Fullones actually became quite wealthy despite their terrible reputation. Successful laundry operations could be extremely profitable, especially those serving rich clients with expensive imported fabrics. A few even made enough money to sponsor public games or build monuments, but no amount of wealth could buy them social acceptance. Money might not stink, as Emperor Vespasian said, but apparently the people who made it from urine always would. The Romans developed elaborate social systems to distance themselves from laundry reality. They used euphemisms for everything, hired middlemen to handle transactions, and maintained the fiction that clean clothes just magically appeared without any gross processes behind them. It was like modern people who love hamburgers but don't want to think about slaughterhouses. What's really wild is that many Fullones were actually freed slaves who had worked their way up to owning their own businesses. They had achieved the Roman dream of economic success, but society still treated them like outcasts because of what they did for a living. Talk about a no-win situation. The whole system shows how societies can create necessary jobs that nobody wants to acknowledge. We do similar things today. We need janitors, garbage collectors, but we don't exactly celebrate them as heroes. The Romans just took this social hypocrisy to an extreme level. So how did this bizarre system actually work as a business? The economics were as twisted as everything else. The Roman laundry industry proves that people will literally do anything for money if the price is right. The profit margins were absolutely insane, because wealthy Romans were willing to pay almost anything to maintain their appearance standards. A single toga cleaning could cost the equivalent of a week's wages for an ordinary worker. That's like paying $2,000 to get your shirt cleaned today. But rich Romans paid these prices routinely because having dirty clothes was social suicide. The economics worked because Roman society placed enormous value on personal appearance, creating demand that justified almost any cost in human suffering. The markup was incredible. Collecting urine cost almost nothing since people were basically paying to have their waste removed. The main expenses were storage, processing, and labor. But the labor was cheap because workers had no other options. Slaves, former slaves, and desperately poor people would accept any work available, even if it meant standing in human waste for 12 hours a day. What's fascinating is how this created a closed-loop economy. Romans paid to have their urine collected, which was then used to clean clothes, which they paid premium prices for. They were essentially paying twice for the same service, and somehow this made perfect business sense. The industry also benefited from Rome's class system, which guaranteed a steady supply of desperate workers. Social mobility was limited, so once you ended up in the laundry business, you were probably stuck there. This kept labor costs low and profits high for the business owners. The urine collection network became so integrated into Roman city planning that urban areas couldn't function without it. The system served dual purposes, providing raw materials for cleaning while solving sanitation problems that could have caused disease outbreaks. It was actually pretty brilliant urban planning, just incredibly gross. Investment in fullonicas was considered a safe bet because demand was constant and competition was limited. Not many people wanted to get into the human waste business, which meant established operations could maintain high prices without worrying about new competitors undercutting them. The Romans never developed alternatives to urine-based cleaning because the existing system was too profitable to change. Why invest in research and development when your current method worked perfectly and generated massive profits? This is probably why the system lasted for centuries without any real innovation. But what happened to all this sophisticated grossness when Rome finally fell? Roman laundry techniques didn't disappear when the empire collapsed. Medieval Europeans continued using urine-based cleaning for centuries afterward, and some traditional textile processes still use similar methods today. The Romans had accidentally discovered industrial chemistry principles that remained relevant for over 1,000 years. Modern environmental movements have actually rediscovered some Roman concepts, particularly using natural waste products as cleaning agents and creating closed-loop systems that minimize resource waste. The Romans achieved sustainable laundry practices 15 centuries before sustainability became trendy. They were accidentally eco-friendly, which is probably the only nice thing you can say about soaking clothes in fermented pee. Some high-end textile restoration still uses ammonia-based treatments similar to Roman methods. Museums and conservators have found that certain ancient fabrics respond better to traditional cleaning techniques than modern chemicals. So in a weird way, Roman fullones were ahead of their time in understanding fabric care. The social dynamics of Roman laundry also provide insights into how societies manage necessary but unpleasant work. The Romans created systems that ensured essential jobs got done while allowing privileged classes to remain completely disconnected from the reality of how their comfort was maintained. Perhaps most importantly, Roman laundry demonstrates that technological sophistication doesn't always mean pleasant working conditions. The Romans developed highly effective industrial processes that required enormous human sacrifice, a pattern that unfortunately continues in various forms today. The biggest lesson might be that people will adapt to almost anything if the alternative is unemployment. The Romans convinced an entire workforce that standing in human waste all day was a legitimate career choice. That's either impressive marketing or a testament to how desperate people can become when they need money. So the next time you complain about doing laundry, remember the Romans. At least your washing machine doesn't require collecting your neighbor's urine first. Though knowing how weird history can be, maybe we should be grateful we don't know what our detergent is really made from. Looking back at Roman laundry practices, the most amazing thing isn't how gross they were, but how well they actually worked. Despite using methods that would horrify modern people, Romans achieved cleaning results that we can barely match today with all our advanced technology. The system lasted for over 500 years across a massive empire, which means it wasn't just some weird local custom, but a genuinely effective industrial process. The Romans figured out sustainable waste management, chemical engineering, and quality control using nothing but human waste and determination. Maybe the real lesson here is that people throughout history have been willing to do absolutely anything to look good. Romans literally built an entire industry around human urine just to have whiter togas. When you think about some of the things people do for fashion today, maybe we haven't really changed that much. Think this was wild? You haven't seen anything yet. History is absolutely packed with bizarre stories like this. Want more mind-blowing historical weirdness? Like the video and hit that subscribe button now and watch videos about the strangest, most unbelievable facts from history that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the past.